I want to start in building on a lot of the content that Pete just shared, why we focus on resilience. I think it's obvious to everyone in this room that reefs are facing increasing and significant climate impacts. But in addition to that, they're also facing a number of other human stressors, from overfishing and destructive fishing to tourism impacts, unsustainable development, and pollution. And when we focus on resilience, it allows us to improve the prospects for recovery and also adaptation. And it helps us to maintain the benefits that reefs provide and all of those services, some of which were shared earlier today. And it also reduces the vulnerability of both reefs and the communities that depend on them. So about 2 years ago, I reached out to a number of my colleagues, scientific colleagues and reef managers. And we were all talking about the fact that we need to manage reefs for resilience. We need to do resilience-based management. But there was no standard definition, and we were often using different words and speaking about it in different ways. So I said to the group, we need to be very clear when we're communicating to managers about what we mean by resilience-based management, and can we collectively come up with a definition? So I would like to, there's a bit of humor in this, is that this is a wonky definition. There are a lot of details packed into here, and I think this is often what happens when you bring a number of scientists in a room and try to get them to agree, and many have their piece that they want to make sure gets included. So a key here is that it addresses current and future stresses influencing ecosystem function to prioritize, implement, and adapt management actions that sustain ecosystems and human well-being. But let's unpack this a little bit. I think the first part is really focusing on the fact that we know we have not just current stressors, but we need to be looking forward. We need to be looking proactively at those impacts that are happening in the future, from coral disease to climate change to changes in ocean chemistry and to the human stressors as well at the more local scales. We need to also support and address the things that are changing the function of the reef. And we need to make sure that we're using this to prioritize our management actions and to help us adaptively manage. And not just to protect reefs, but to protect reefs so that we can protect the benefits that they provide to people. So in a nutshell, the goal of resilience-based management is really to identify and prioritize management actions that enhance ecosystem resilience. And we do it to protect not just the species and the habitats, but the processes and the functions that support the reef's ability to withstand and recover. So one of the questions when we started talking about resilience-based management that we were asked all the time with managers was, how is this different? How is this different than what we've been doing for the last many, many decades? And the key point is that it builds on all of the work that we've all collectively been doing for many, many years. And the foundation of resilience-based management is managing those stressors like overfishing and destructive fishing and pollution and sedimentation, et cetera. But we know that that's not enough. We also need to be including actions that support the ecosystem processes. These are things like recruitment, improving water quality, and Pete talked quite a bit this morning about the importance of managing herbivores to ensure that we have settlement substrate for corals to grow. But another thing that's a little bit different is that it's not just about the ecological factors on the reef. We also know that we have to be looking at those social drivers. And we know that we have to be coming up with actions that can support alternative livelihoods. Things like seaweed farming, things that can help generate income for communities to help remove pressure off the reef. And we also know that we need strategies that build the adaptive capacity and the adaptation potential for people. There have been a number of studies that show that when we actually support people and help support livelihoods and help their ability to adapt to climate change, we have reduced impacts on coral reefs. So I want to share a brief history of where we started and where we are today. Traditionally, reef management was really focused on single species management. It was focused on a target fish or a target resource. And then it was focused on really maintaining that current condition. Variability was often seen as a bad thing, something that you wanted to control. And people were seen as being separate from the ecosystem. And then we moved into a phase in the early 2000s of ecosystem-based management. And this was motivated by a real recognition that we're moving from an ecological system to an integrated socio-ecological system. And we're not just managing single species. We're managing multiple species, habitats, and ecosystem services. Change and disturbance are a natural part of the system. And we need to plan for the historical range of variability. And we recognize that humans are linked to the ecosystem. And now we've entered the phase of resilience-based management. And critically, this builds on all of the foundations that were set and developed through ecosystem-based management. The managing multiple services, managing multiple species and habitats, managing for change, maintaining variability, maintaining diversity, and redundancy in the system. But the key difference between resilience-based management and ecosystem-based management is that with resilience-based management, there was this recognition that people have the power to change the system. It's not just that they're interconnected, but that our actions can actually drive change. So why would we apply this? Why would we apply resilience-based management? Well, number one, we know it's essential. And certainly the last decade has demonstrated to us that we have got to be building climate into our reef management strategies. It can help us to prioritize which management actions can give us the greatest benefit. And Pete shared some modeling that helps to inform those actions earlier in his presentation today. And we have a limited amount of resources to deploy. So we want to know that we're deploying them in the right places, both in terms of financing and human capacity, places that are most likely to survive climate change. And also because it helps us to deliver on our global policy commitments. If you look at the HE targets and the Paris Agreement and the Sustainable Development Goals, we have built resilience into each of those. And you'll see the language about building and supporting resilient systems in all of our global marine targets and some of our development targets as well. One of the other things that I think has been really important, and this is watching this field for the last 2 decades, is that when we start seeing these massive bleaching events, it is incredibly depressing. It can feel defeating. And that reef managers often feel frustrated and like climate change is something that is beyond their control. But managing our reefs under this framing helps us recognize that there are steps that managers can take on the ground to consider these impacts and to build this into their strategies. And it can also help to validate the importance of their local actions. And it provides, critically, a compelling and positive narrative. And with many news headlines talking about the end of reefs or the death of reefs or the obituary for the Great Barrier Reef and others, it can be very difficult to maintain the critical support that is needed for the global action that is required to save coral reefs. And so we need to make sure that we're communicating honestly and with accurate science, but that we're providing hope and an impetus for people to take action. We also recognize that it is empowering managers to see those links between a healthy system and healthy people. And if we look at it in a resilience context, it can also prevent really important opportunities to access significant amounts of climate funding. So I'd like to stop there and open it up for questions. Thank you.